actually need to fulfill them and see how best we do. Let's see. Let's go on to the next. Pace setting. Pace setting, this one is self-explanatory. How self-explanatory is the best setting management style embodies leading from the front. It's like I am the leader and I'm leading by example. Simply put, pace setting is like leading by example. You, the manager, leads from the front and see that others follow what you do. Typically, pace setting involves setting high or hard to reach standards in an effort to drive your team to achieve new best and hit bigger goals. You see that? You lead, you follow, and you actualize your dreams. Pace. You lead, you set the pace. What are the merits? If your team is capable and motivated, this style can lead to greater productivity. Whenever your team is ready, you can succeed. And this style can lead to effective functioning of an institution, and it can make managers to succeed. But the merits, if you are consistently pushing your team to meet stretch goals, you can cause team to burn out. You see that? If you are leading them and they should follow, and at all points you must succeed to reach the goal, they will get tired. And when they get tired, they will be demotivated. And when they get demotivated, they will relax. And when they relax, the problem comes in. So, a lot. This management style also emphasizes personal accomplishment. So it can create divisions and resentment. It can make them to be tired, some people will be divided, they will not want to follow, etc. And a lot. Democratic management style, wow. In the last class, I did make reference to democratic, on how Abraham Lincoln actually set the pace. Democracy is the government of the people, for the people, and by the people, and in real sense, it's like participation. Look at what it is. A democratic management style is also sometimes referred to as consultative, consensus, participative, collaborative, affirmative. See that? It's like you trying to affiliative, sorry. It's like you trying to ensure that you consult others to give their opinions and you work together. It's like you trying to ensure that the others come together, they participate. Whether they are subordinate, whether they are middle, you have different levels of management. We have the lower level, we have the middle level, we have the top level. You all come together, sit at a round table, give different opinions, and then all of you participate. The democratic management style allows opinion, it allows participation, it allows individuals to give their input on a specific subject matter, and all of you can now arrive at a logical conclusion. But, however, managers who adopt a democratic style encourage idea sharing and regular employee participation. You see that? You allow idea sharing, people share their ideas, you allow people to participate. You must be that kind of person with a strong sense of responsibility to participate. In a democracy, you as the manager retain the final decision making. After everybody has given their decision, you can make a choice and select the best possible alternative for the decision you are about to make. Let's see the merits and demerits. A democratic leadership style helps your employee feel valued. The employees can feel valued. I belong. My decision was made. Indeed, I also suggested this. Now we are achieving. They can feel belong and then participate to ensure that they succeed because it is their own opinion that counts. It can also encourage them to solve their own problems. How? Because by coming up with opinions and you agree to that opinion, they solve the problem and then you move on. And by that, you actualize your dream by achieving your objective. You see? A lot. Let's see the demerits. A lot of advantages can be found. Demerits. The biggest downside of democratic management is that it takes time. Sometimes you need to make hasty decisions. But if you are employing a democratic management style, by the time you come to ask them to give their opinion, settle down, there will be arguments, counter-arguments. Time is going and there will be problems. So therefore, it has a lot of downside in that. And to avoid this, you will need to either promote anonymous suggestions. Sometimes you just ask people to suggest, and then their opinions you can take randomly. Make sure that you give a unanimous decision. Don't say it is what Mary said that is correct. You have to be careful sometimes to ensure that people are not frustrated. A lot of other disadvantages can be found as we discuss. Let us see the laissez-faire. Well, laissez-faire basically is just very simple. Laissez-faire management style emphasizes employees' freedom. This is like a carefree method of leadership where you, the manager, does not have to actually monitor or put an eagle eye on them. You just believe that they are competent and they can do it even without being monitored. Laissez-faire, look at it. It's a laissez-faire originates from the French and directly translates to let do. In English, in other words, laissez-faire managers let their employees do what they will. see that you allow them to do what you think is right. You allow them to do what you think is the best. And on their own opinion, they know what to do already. So you don't need to force them, you don't need to monitor them. You just have to ensure that you allow them to do what they think is right. And indeed, it is employed in most institutions. Well, not in Africa, because in Africa you have to monitor. And Sierra Leone, to be specific, you have to really put fire on them. Otherwise, they will not do it. You leave them, some people will not even come to office. I can still imagine when during the past government, when government officials were not monitored, some of them were not going there. And that was more or less a laissez-faire system, where people were relaxing, supervisor were not going, manager were not going, etc. But when President Joe pronounced that if you do not go to work at 8, you lose your job. I can still imagine. People were going there, I had an uncle of mine who were not even going to work. But then it came to a time, just because of the pronouncement, he was even going at work at 7 to ensure that he's not sacked. So you see, I believe sometimes it cannot work in all cases. Well, let's see what happens. It has merit. If you have a team of highly skilled professionals, they may thrive with freedom. You see that? Because it's management style that allows freedom. So definitely, managers that are experienced can work freely and with the motivation to succeed. This management style can result in a high level of job satisfaction. Because I am working, so I feel satisfied that yes, I'm doing what my idea is telling me, what my knowledge is telling me, what I know, what I understand, and definitely succeed. There are demerits anyway in the management style. If your team is not self-motivated, it's not skilled enough, then this cannot work, and there are bound to be problems. And when these problems occur, there can easily be, failure in actualizing. A lot of other downside can be seen as we read along. Let's go. Now, topic 1 is over. Now, topic 2, briefly. What is topic 2 talking about? Bureaucracy. And bureaucracy is a theory and a concept in management that is propounded by Professor Max Weber. We start by asking the question, who is Max Weber? Now, in asking that question, we say, in fact, his complete name is Maximilian Karl Emil Weber. Maximilian Karl Emil Weber, popularly known as Max Weber, was a German sociologist, philosopher, jurist, and political economist, who is regarded today as one of the most important theories on the development of modern society. He was born on the 24th of April in 1864 and then he died on the 14th June 1920. Indeed, Max Weber died. So this is just a brief summary of him. But he has been a great scholar, a man of substance and not circumstances, somebody who has contributed to the development of philosophy, sociology, social work. Of course, today, if you're talking about management, he is one of those to be accredited. Who is one of those to be given, because he's the first to coin the term bureaucracy. And indeed, we are going to speak about it. Because what is the bureaucracy? What is the background? At the end of the 19th century, it was a German sociologist and author of the Protestant ethic and the spirit of capitalism in 1905. That is Max Weber, who was the first to use and describe the term bureaucracy. This is also known as the bureaucratic theory of management. Of course, bureaucratic management's theory of the Max Weber theory, he believed bureaucracy was the most efficient way to set an organization. Like I said in the last class, he believed in any institution, it must have laws. In any institution, there must be rules. In any institution, there must be regulations. The people must follow. Somebody must be on top, somebody must be at the bottom, somebody must be in the middle, etc. A lot of commonsensical explanation can be attributed to what I'm saying now. But forever, an institution without bureaucracy cannot succeed. Even in the college, there is a bureaucratic setting. In an organization, there is a bureaucratic setting. In a country, there is a bureaucratic setting, and that has come into play. People have accepted this in any institution, in any formal institution. Now let's see what happens. But there is a legal responsibility to this. According to the bureaucratic theory of Max Weber, 3 types of power can be found in organizations. And what are they? Traditional power, charismatic power, and legal power. He refers in his bureaucratic theory to the latter as the bureaucracy. See that? This is what sociologists call authority patterns. In earlier power before this time, traditional leadership was common, where leadership was based on inheritance. People could inherit from their parents, from whosoever, and they become leaders. But then, as time progresses, we now have Max Weber propounding 3 authority patterns, as sociologists would call it, which is the traditional, we have the traditional, we have the charismatic, and we have what? The legal or rational authority patterns. What am I saying here? Traditional, like I said, is based on inheritance and is based on traditional cultural orientations of which the individual to occupy the governance or the leadership status. For example, I am a paramount chief, or my father was a paramount chief, I can easily become a paramount chief. That is traditional authority pattern. Or, say for example, in a specific traditional setting, somebody was a leader, and definitely I can succeed that person. Traditional. While charismatic is saying that the leader possesses some qualities. He possesses some character. He possesses some sense of humor. He possesses some qualities in him that has made people see him as the best. So, if people, for example, decide to select you to lead an organization, to lead a country, they vote for you automatically because you know how to talk, or because you are handsome, or because I can imagine in the past elections you see, I know most people voted for President Biya because he is fine boy. They said I like him, I like his lips, I like the way he talks. So because of some of those qualities, they voted him. And President Nkrumah also was voted in because of some of those qualities, and that is charismatic authority pattern. As we move in to the legal arsenal, it has to do with upholding, maintaining, and defending the laws. For example, somebody who is legally voted in according to the laws of the land to take up on a position of authority possesses what? The legal rational authority patterns as put forward by Max Weber. However, I also want to make it plain to you that somebody can become a traditional leader. The same person can become a legal authority leader. Somebody can also become a charismatic leader. Now we'll move on to the characteristics of bureaucracy. And according to Max Weber, the characteristics of bureaucracy are very relevant for all institutions, for all organizations, for all departments, for all policy makers and individuals wishing to become managers. Why? Because they help you to shape the institution, they help you to shape the organization, and to enable you to actualize your desired objectives. Among these characteristics of bureaucracy, we have task specialization. What does that mean? It simply means that tasks are divided into simple routine categories and basis of competence and functional specialization. Every employee is responsible for what he or she does best and knows exactly what is expected of him or her. This is what Emile Durkheim and that of Adam Smith refers to as the concept of division of labor. Why? Because individuals are employed in institutional organizations based on how competent they are. The accountant is responsible for finance. Social worker is responsible for policy analysis. The political scientist is responsible for. So each and every individual is employed based on what he knows how to do best. That is what Weber said. And when organizations operate like that, definitely success is bound to be achieved. Let's see what the next characteristic is. Hierarchical layers of authority. Like I've already said, in the commonsensical viewpoint, one could say that any institution must have a top, a middle, and that of the lower level of management. So in hierarchy, somebody is at the top, somebody is in the middle, and somebody is at the bottom, which is what is actually trying to talk about. Managers are organized into hierarchical layers, where each layer of management is responsible for its staff and overall performance, you see. So that is why when we look at the levels of management, we have three. We have a top level of management, we have a middle level of management, we have a lower level of management, and each level of management has staff under its operations that are responsible, of which they are in charge of. So we have a lot of other things to do. Let's see the third characteristic, what it talks about. Formal selection. What is formal selection talking about? It says, all employees are selected on the basis of technical skills and competencies, which have been acquired through training, education, and experience. One of the basic principles is that employees are paid for their service and that level of their salary is dependent on negotiation. You see, what is it? Formal selection. In most institutions, Weber advised that it is relevant that we use the formal setting. Well, which is to say, somebody wishing to work for an institution must apply. The person has to go to an interview, the person has to go to rules and regulations, the person has to go through a lot of other concepts and principles. And the payment that is given to that individual depends on the position or the level of that position. And that is what is done. So in essence, you have formal selection as a core characteristics propounded by, and he's talking about formal principles, formal basic means, etc. And that is very relevant towards the development of an institution. Without formal, success cannot be achieved. Let's see what the fourth characteristic is. Rules and requirements. Rules and requirements. What is he talking about when Max Weber? What was he really thinking of when Max Weber mentioned rules and requirements? From a commonsensical viewpoint, one could easily say that rules and requirements talks about lay down principles. Lay down principles that each and every individual must follow. Unlike what Thomas Hobbes, a famous political scientist, was asserted, that a state without laws, without rules and regulations, without individuals to take over governance, that state will result to anarchy, brutish, nasty, and so on, etc. When you look at an extract of what Thomas Hobbes was actually talking about, it simply means that any organization, any institution, without rules and regulations, will not succeed. Because individual will do what they think is right and will not lead to backlash. And I think Max Weber was right when he mentioned that. Look at what he said. The formal rules and requirements are required to ensure uniformity. Uniformity, so that employees know exactly what is expected of them. In this sense, the rules and requirements can be considered predictive. All administrative processes are defined in the official rules. You see that? For example, the person acting as director has his own specific rules and regulations. The person acting as coordinator has specific rules and regulations. He has duties, responsibilities, etc. These are specified based on the institution that you're working for. And just as an institution, an academic institution, lecturers have their roles and responsibilities. Registrars have their roles and responsibilities, they have their duties, students also have their duties, etc. And without these rules and regulations, successes cannot be achieved. And so, Max Weber was right when he really mentioned that. Let's see what the fifth characteristic is. Impersonal. What was Max Weber really talking about? What was he thinking when he mentioned about impersonal relationship? He said, regulations and clear requirements create distant and impersonal relationship between employees, with the additional advantage of preventing nepotism or involvement from outsiders or politics. This implies that for any institution, for any organization, or in any governance status, one is not expected to use personal relationship, but rather we need impersonal relationship, where you should not mix professionalism with familiarity. Because we are from the same side does not mean I should employ him when he is incompetent. Because he is my brother or my son or my uncle does not mean I should employ him when I know very well he is competent. Let us go for individuals who are competent, let us go for individuals who understand the concept, let us go for people who really know, and let us work with people, and we do not need to mix familiarity. When something wrong has been done, when the individual is supposed to be punished, let us punish that person because we know very well that impersonal relationships should not be tolerated. And Max Weber was right, and he maintained for any organization, for any country, for any institution that deviates from this, is not going to succeed. And I believe if we apply that, we will avoid tribalism. If we apply that, we will avoid nepotism. If we apply that, we will avoid favoritism. And that is what we are talking about, impersonal relationship. And that is a characteristic propounded by Max Weber so far. Let us see what the sixth characteristic is, which he called career orientation. I like that. And today, even as social workers, we are upholding, maintaining, and defending this characteristic, which is what? Career orientation. Career orientation is saying that employees of a bureaucratic organization are selected on the basis of their expertise. Okay? This helps in the deployment of the right people in the right positions, and thereby optimally utilizing human capital. In a bureaucracy, it is possible to build a career on the basis of experience and expertise. As a result, it offers a lifetime employment. The right division of labor within a bureaucratic organization also allows employees to specialize themselves further. What does that mean? It simply means that just as a specialization is talking about, career orientation simply means that individuals choose their own career and jobs are allocated to them based on their career. And as time progresses, they are forced to go for further training. That is why in social work, we have what we call professional development seminar, which tells you that professionally, employees should develop themselves. And as you continue, we have what we call continuing professional development seminar, which means even after graduation, you should continue to learn. So automatically, this is because you need to develop your career. Right? This is because you need to develop your path. And that leads you to success and progress in your social work career. Definitely, that is the 6 characteristics recommended by Maxwell. There are advantages, and I know there are many. But for the sake of this lecture, let us just look at this. Generally speaking, the term bureaucracy has a negative connotation and it often links to government agencies and large organizations. Nevertheless, the great benefit of a bureaucracy is that large organizations within many hierarchical layers can become structured and work effectively. It is precisely the established rules and procedures that allow for high efficiency and consistent execution. You see that? So when you look at bureaucracy, definitely it allows us to succeed. It allows us to work effectively. It allows efficiency. It allows management. A lot of other positive things can be seen as we progress. All this makes it easier for management to maintain control because there are rules and regulations. Because we are specialized, management can easily succeed. Managers can find it easier to actually succeed. A lot of other advantages can be seen beside this. Disadvantages of bureaucracy. Bureaucracy is characterized by a large amount of red tape. That is the problem with bureaucracy. Because there are a lot of tables, a lot of personnel, a lot of rules, a lot of people. Some organizations have so many rules to the extent that people cannot be able to subdue. So look at what happens. You lose competent employees. Some people get fed up. Employees will not be motivated if it becomes too bureaucratic. And that is the problem that most scholars across the world have maintained, have criticized, have brought forth to condemn the concept of bureaucracy. But despite that, we also say that bureaucracy is extremely dependent on regulatory and policy compliance. See that? That is why policy is very important here. You see? So we say that in as much as bureaucracy depends on rules, depends on policies, etc., we see how difficult it is to go under a bureaucratic regime, especially when the regime is dictatorial and autocratic in nature. There are problems faced with this, just in addition to their disadvantages, because employees of a bureaucratic organizations have no opportunity to voice their opinion or influence decision making. A bureaucracy may demotivate. I've mentioned that. Employees can be demotivated when an institution becomes too bureaucratic. And when that happens, it can lead to problems in actualizing the targeted objectives. Moreover, over the course of time, employees may start to get annoyed at the various rules. You see, some people get annoyed. What kind of problem is this? Every time you're always compressing us, telling us to do this and that. A lot of problems. Too many rules can create conflict. Too many rules can create demotivation. Too many rules can make people feel demotivated. So we see what happens. Of course, there are references, and then this is the end of the lecture. But just in summary, the concept of bureaucracy is as unique and very important as any other concept of management. And Max Weber actually brought this. How relevant is bureaucracy to social work? Because we social workers are managers. We are policy makers. And we use policies to succeed. And now Max Weber is saying that there must be rules and regulations. There must be policies in place for any institution. And we create those policies. So this is to tell you how valuable policies are. This will tell you how important policies are. This will tell you how we can use policies to make organizations successful, to make institutions successful, to make the country Sierra Leone successful, to make the world a better place to live. Without policies, without rules and regulations, without bureaucratic governance, without bureaucratic structures, successes cannot be achieved. And I implore all of us to ensure that we maintain, defend, and hold legacy as a very important concept propounded by Nigeria. Once again, thank you very much. God bless you.